Hi, everybody. Today I'm talking about late walking and why late walkers often turn into late talkers. And my name is Marcy Melzer, and I'm an intuitive speech and language pathologist, and I help parents teach their late talking children how to use the words they need to share their wisdom with the world. And I do that with my Waves of Communication parent coaching program. Today, we are talking about late walking, and then we're also going to talk about how you as a parent can know a little bit more about your child's language development future by looking at how they learn to walk. Late walking is one thing that you can use to maybe understand your child's late talking a little bit better, and we're going to dig in and talk about that today. So let's dig in a little bit and talk about late talking and some things to consider if you have a late walker, okay? The first thing to consider is, why is your child a late walker? Why were they a late walker? If they're walking now, if you have an older child, we can sort of think back to figure out why they were late walking. Now, it can be many different reasons, like I said. The first can be physical. Maybe they literally have an illness that they were, or they were born prematurely, or they have something physiologically wrong with their legs or motor, their gross motor anatomy. The physiology of your child can cause them to be late walking for any of a million different reasons. But if your child's not well, they're not going to be able to learn much, especially moving their whole body. So, if your child's if it was a physical issue, an illness or issue that caused your child to be late walking, that's one thing to consider. And then because the thing is, the things that cause late walking may also be the culprits that are causing late talking. So if it's a physiological thing like prematurity that caused your child to be late walking, that some issues that go with that prematurity may also be affecting their ability to develop, verbal language, or comprehension or attention. Even if your child is not well, they're not going to be able to focus on you and pay attention real well. The next thing that you need to consider that could be a cause of your child's late walking and potentially late talking are developmental issues. So let's say that your child, everything went great, but that things started to go when they have allergies. Perhaps they were born with a syndrome, or perhaps, but developmental kinds of things are what happen if children do become sick, or if they have like Down syndrome or a syndrome that's going to cause them, overall developmental delays. The other thing that actually can cause late walking that also is a big cause, like the number one cause of late talking, is ear infections and ear fluid. So if your child suffered from any ear issues, the balance center of our body is in our ears. So children who have ear infections, ear, nose, and throat problems with mucus, glue ear, things like that, those things often cause late walking because they affect the child's balance. And they also cause late talking because they stop a child's ability to hear language. They also cause sensory issues, pain and things like that, that are very distracting to kids when they're supposed to be at the age of listening to language. So ear infections are a big cause of late walking and then again late talking. And then the other reason that sort of these other ones didn't fall into the same category that kids are late walking and also causes them to be late talking is lack of confidence. So some kids will actually just, watch and wait and watch and wait and sort of all of a sudden one day get up and walk. Or they might be trying it when you're not looking. Cruising around on furniture or letting go of things when you look the other way because they're not confident about their walking skills and they have sort of a perfectionist personality, which kids can even have at a very young age. If your child is otherwise quite controlling and they want to, you know, have everything their way and they're also a late walker, you may think that, you know, they may be not wanting to walk until they are confident that they're really good at it. Or maybe they're afraid of falling down. And so they only want to start walking when they are, you know, confident that they're not going to fall down and hurt themselves. So that's another reason that kids can really be, you know, late walking. But that confidence can also be a real whammy when it comes to talking, because a lot of kids are late talking because they just don't have confidence to be able to use words. And sometimes you might hear them practicing, or those are the kids sometimes who start talking, you hear them on the baby monitor when they're in their bed at night, or the lights are off and they start talking like that. That's when a lot of late talkers who are late talking because of confidence issues, they'll practice when you're not looking, just like the late walkers will practice when you're not looking. They'll let go or they'll start to take steps when you're not looking. So the first thing to consider when you're thinking about late walking and late talking is what caused the late walking. Because if you're still trying to figure out why your child is late talking, if you don't really know what the cause is, and your child was also late walking, you could start to look at the reasons they're late walking as underlying causes for the late talking. And it's important whenever you have a late talker that you understand or anytime you have a child who has any issue at all, I guess, is that you make sure that you understand the cause. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about real quick then is how the progression of development goes with motor skills and language skills. So the first thing is that kids learn to develop from the very first motor skills they learn are gross motor skills as a baby. And as they learn to develop and move, you know, and they develop interest in what's around them, and they move for the purpose of locomotion, to get there, to get to the thing it is. And obviously kids don't know how to walk coming out of the womb, so it all depends on their interest in something that's out of reach is what's going to motivate them to walk. So you'll always see the physical therapist holding the ball across the room, or, you know, whenever moms are getting their babies to talk, they'll stay a few steps away and encourage the child to come to them because they want to get to something that's motivating, okay? That's how kids learn everything, is by every new skill is because it serves a purpose for them. And then kids learn as they develop motor skills to get to the things that they're interested in. And they use whatever methods they can. It's obviously more efficient for them to walk on 2 feet. But if that's tough for them to do, they're going to use whatever method possible. They're going to, you know, crawl, they're going to cruise, they're going to pull up on stuff to try to, you know, get over there and whatever. So their gross motor skills come first because that's what kids learn to explore. And then once they start exploring is when the language starts to come. And the language is where they start to share the experiences of the things that they're exploring. A lot of times kids who are still not very confident in their gross motor skills, they love to learn to talk while they do gross motor activities. When kids learn locomotion, or they learn that they can actually move to get to what they want to explore, they get there and then they engage with that thing that they're, and that's where the language comes in, where they learn what it's called. If they're going towards a ball, they go and then someone says ball, and they learn that it's a ball. And if they touch mama's face and she says, mama, this is your mama, that's how kids learn that there is a language that relates to the things that they interact with. So first it's the gross motor, and then the language starts, because what happens is the better your child gets with their gross motor skills, the better they are at getting to things and investigating them. And during that period of time, they're also cognitively developing the ability to investigate and learn things on a more specific way. So the first language, the first walking or the first moving you get is crawling or army crawling or things like that. And then it moves up the developmental ladder into cruising and crawling on all fours and standing up and balancing and then walking and running and climbing and all of that stuff. And language is the same kind of progression. It all kind of goes hand in hand. You have to get to the stuff to investigate it, to learn about it, to talk about it. And then the more you investigate it, the more you learn. With fine motor skills, they are learning to investigate the tiny bits of things and take stuff apart and put it together and dump things out and take things out. And they learn that their actions have reactions and that things happen when they do things, okay? And with language development, it's the same. Kids learn that when they say things, things happen. You know, when I cry, someone comes, and wow, that worked. I'm going to cry more so people come and solve my problems for me. That's what babies do. And then as kids move older, they learn that words work to get the things they want. When they say cookie, they get a cookie because, you know, someone handed them a cookie and said, here's a cookie. And that's how they learn. So the motor skills develop and the language skills develop along a continuum, but they are definitely interspersed, because the more exploring you do, the more language you develop. So that's kind of how it moves that way. And you can see how, if a child is stuck in any motor level, like if they are crawling but not walking, then their eye level is going to be real low, and the things that they can explore are going to be limited to what's, you know, below knee level. And then when they stand up and they cruise, their language is going to improve because they can see more stuff. Now they're seeing stuff at, you know, hip level, or, you know, depending on how high they are. And then the more they climb and the more they get into stuff and open doors and get into drawers and all that stuff, that's when they're really learning to explore language and doing that stuff. And so it all happens developmentally for kids between the ages of 9 months and about 2 years old. The kids learn to develop those motor skills and those language skills during that key time. And again, if they're struggling with a motor skill that comes before a language skill, they're going to be stuck with their focus on that motor skill, because again, motor skills, just like language skills, meet a need for a child. And if their motivation is getting to something and that's all they care about, they're not caring yet about investigating it. And certainly they're not caring about sharing it with anybody else, that experience. They just want to get there to it, you know? And if getting there is so hard that their focus is 100% on that movement, then they're literally tuning out the language that's coming in. Not by choice, but it happens because babies are only able to focus on so much stuff, okay? And little kids, as they start to investigate, they're learning new things all the time. You know, you're giving them new foods to eat, you're taking them new places, they're seeing new people, they're exploring all these things and all this input's coming at them. But their focus is on walking, and they get going and they start walking. And especially if you have a late walker who is in physical therapy. I have a client like this right now in my program. Their child was late walking and they focused 100%, them, everyone around them, the therapists, all their time, 24/7, it was all about walking because he didn't walk till he was 2. So really late walking. And so for that whole period, that whole 9 months to 2 years old period, 100% of the focus, not just of that child, but of his parents, of the therapists, of the doctors, of everything, was all about walking. So they're working on walking all the time and they're getting their kids to try. So they're using the words around that thing. And it's like, come on, let's go. You can do it. And once the child does do it, then there's lots of cheerleading. Woo, you did it. Yay. You bravo, yay. They're walking and you hear. So what the child is hearing, their language exposure, their primary language exposure, is that cheerleading language. And so these kids, their first language that comes out isn't necessarily going to be cookie or drink or any of that. It's going to be, yay, woo, you did it. They're going to hear those phrases over and over and over and over from teachers and therapists and all of that stuff. And those are the phrases that are going to stick in their head. Because remember, they're tuning out the other language. They're tuning out when people show them things and explore things because they're so busy concentrating on moving and walking that they miss it. And that's what happens that causes them to be late talking. Is because they're so busy focused on this walking that they just aren't focusing on the language at all. So then what happens, okay, with them is that they still have needs, right? I mean, they still need to eat, they still need cuddles, they still need the toy, the iPhone video they want to watch, they still need all that stuff. But they don't have even the receptive language exposure for what those things are called or how you use them or whatever, because every time somebody talks about them, their focus is on the reward. If they want something, their focus is on this. They don't know how to get it. They don't know how to get what they want. So they figure it out for themselves with the same kind of strategies they use to figure out how to get to the places where they want. They figure out how to get the things they want with their motor skills. So what they're going to do is once they learn how to walk and their thing is in the other room, they're going to use walking. They're going to come get you and drag you to the thing that they want so that you can see it, because they found it by getting up and walking in there, and they want you to help them do that thing too. So they're going to walk and take you there. Okay, when they learn to climb, to investigate things, and they know that the cookies or gummy bears or whatever it is that they want is in that cabinet, then they're going to learn with their motor skills how to climb and go get it. They're not going to focus on wanting to ask you using language because they don't even know that that system exists. The only system they know is getting there to get it, right? So they're going to get there to get it as much as they can. So what ends up happening with these kids, they get to be 2 and 3 and they learn to walk and they learn to climb and they get really good at the gross motor skills because they meet their needs. That's how they're getting what they want. They're using their motor skills to do it, okay? This is why a lot of people, therapists, may suggest that kids use sign language if they're not using words, because they're used to using their motor skills to communicate things. So a lot of kids will invent gestures, the point, or they'll wave a whole hand at something, you know, because they don't know that pointing is a language thing, that this is, I want this thing. They don't know that that's how that works until you show them. And so parents will show their kids how to point to things if they're not saying words. And they'll show them how to communicate, how to take me to the thing or show me what you want. Because the thing is, now you've got a 2-year-old child who's not using language, okay? Because they didn't hear it. They weren't paying attention. They didn't hear it if they had ear infections, and they weren't paying attention to it because they focused all their energy on their walking. So now you're stuck with a child who is confident walking, and confident getting what they want using their motor skills. So when then what happens is then you take them to speech therapy, and the speech therapist says, well, your child isn't using these words to communicate. They really don't understand language. They're not following directions, because they didn't really learn language in the first place. So they work with systems to try to teach them language, teach them to understand things, following directions, matching things, learning that, objects have names, and learning vocabulary for stuff. Because until you learn that, this is a pen, you're never going to be able to ask for it with words. So that's what happens. And then the other thing that also happens is that they start to use pictures to represent the things. So instead of words, because words are difficult for that child to use, they use pictures because they're already using these nonverbal ways, these motor skills to communicate. They teach them other motor skills that more closely represent the things that they want. A sign for cookie or drink or eat or more or please or things like that, so that they can, try to get what they want using something that more closely resembles language. It's still a motor skill, but it's closer because it represents something. And then what happens is kids get good at using those because they're even more effective than the wave or even than the point, because now they say, they can hand you a picture or they can do a sign, and they get comfortable in those strategies, but then they break down. See, because as kids get older and they get to be 2.5 and 3 and 3.5 and older, suddenly the gestures and the pictures and that kind of stuff don't work, because they're only good for the things that, that they represented, the physical things, the food or the whatever. They don't really talk about the events and things that you have. So kids don't learn how to use the language. And because how would a therapist know how to teach everything? They teach what they have accessible in their therapy room. So that's how it goes. And that's how kids get stuck in these nonverbal communication patterns. Late walkers especially get stuck in these nonverbal communication patterns, and that's how they do it. So the last thing that I want to tell you on this video before I get off here is how to know, based on your child's motor development, how to focus on verbal language and language facilitation. And I just kind of came up with this today, realizing that there's a lot of information that we can get about kids' motor development to identify the kinds of strategies that will work to help them learn to use talking. So the thing is that you need to consider is, how did your child learn eventually to walk? How was the progression of their walking? And it's going to be different for every child. So some kids learn to walk in a very standard way. It's just late. So that would be like the developmental kiddos, the premature kiddos, like that. So if your child did eventually learn to walk, just, as soon as they figured it out, it went just smooth, and they went through all the normal developmental stages that the physical therapists talk about, then your child's natural language development may very well go on that same level, because that means that your child, once they figured out developmentally how it goes, and sort of once you get them over the hump to get them started, then they learn to develop language quite naturally. And that's what happens a lot with kids who have ear infections and glue ear and things like that. Once parents can get them over the hurdle of giving up the nonverbal communication, then when they start to learn language, it just happens real fast, okay? Then there are the kids who are late walking, and their developmental walking journey happened with, they skipped steps. So some kids go from creeping to just standing up and walking. Like they just never crawled even, hardly. So the kids who skip parts, okay, I call those kids the big thinkers. Like those are kids that know they want to get there, but they just don't know how. And they're going to come up with their own strategy. And these are the kids that often get really stuck in the nonverbal because they go against the norm. You know, this is the way, I promise you, the developmental therapists know the best progression for walking for children is creeping and crawling and cruising and walking. And it should always go through those steps. But some kids don't. Some kids just skip it. Some kids just do it their own way. And if that's how your child learned how to walk, then there's a very good chance that that's how your child is going to learn how to talk too. It's not going to happen on their natural flow. You may skip over periods, you may do things. And when I coach parents, it's important for me, I'm going to start asking this question all the time now, because I think that this is a really big, because that's the mindset of your child. Okay, we're looking at how they learn, and when you figure out how they learned how to walk and you take that into consideration, that's probably how they're going to learn everything, you know. So if your child skips steps in walking, that means that they're a big thinker. Like they have the goal in mind and they're going to just figure it out their own way. They're not going with the system, okay? And then there are the kids who learn to walk by doing completely alternative ways. The kids who are what I call booty scoochers, you know, the ones who just, you know, scooch across the floor like this on their bottom, and or the ones who only army crawl, like they never get up on all four. They only army crawl or drag themselves across the floor using the carpet, or they just constantly just wait and expect people to pick them up and take them places. Like they're so good at the nonverbal communication that they could get people to do it. And then ultimately they just set them down and they started walking, you know? So there's that. And those kids, when they start to use language, so if your child used all kinds of alternative methods, an alternative to the norm may be the way that you get your kids' attention. You know, those are the kids that you have to keep it silly. You have to keep it interesting. You have to keep it fun, you know, because they aren't so, you know, like the kids who skip over and are very goal-driven, like the real controlling kids, like I'm going to get there no matter what. These are kids who like, I'll walk when I'm ready. This method works for me, okay? You know, I just can boot scoot and crawl along the floor until the toes of my shoes wear out, and I don't care because it gets me there just fine. I'll walk when I'm good and ready and yada yada. You know, those kids that they're on their own timeline, they're doing their own thing, and I think those kids have a big confidence issue too, is that, you know, they're confident in the skills that they're in and they get stuck there. And anytime you try to introduce something new, they resist, okay? Like the kids that skip over, the kids that are very goal driven, all you got to do is show them the goal. You know, come on, come here and get the ball, and then they're off. Like they're motivated by it. But the alternative kids, they're like, I don't really feel like walking today, so that's all right. It's not that important to me to come give you a hug. I'm just going to sit here and play with my own thing. It's just not important. It's not a priority for them. And so when you look at your child for late walking, just like late talking, and you realize that talking's not a priority for them because they already have an alternative system that's working for them, then that's really tricky. Like those kids, you really have to help them shift. And this is how it goes with language facilitation. If they're not talking, they think it's too hard for them to talk, or they think that it's, you know, no fun, you know, it's not happy. But you as a parent know that walking is going to be way more beneficial for them. Not only that, but by the time they get to be 2 years old and older, and they're not walking, they're getting heavy. And you don't want to carry them around, and you want them to be able to explore the world and do all of that stuff. And that's what language facilitation does too for families, is it just really helps them teach their children how to explore the world with language now that they can get there and get going. So, and if your child isn't walking, I guess I should say this, we talk about late walking, meaning kids that eventually do walk. But if your child has a physiological problem that causes them to not be able to walk, if they have, a real physical illness, that they have to be in a wheelchair or use a stander or things like that, kids like that learn that their alternative system, like the wheelchair or whatever, meets their need. And as long as they can have access to the things they need to explore, then you should be able to teach them. But they aren't learning to walk like a late walker is, okay? A late walker is focusing their energy on walking. And because they're doing that, they're missing the language that naturally comes at kids in those key developmental times between 9 months and 19 months. So I hope you can understand. I hope that explains some things, answered some questions, talked about language and walking, and you can get a little bit more information from your child, understanding why they were late walking and learning about how they learned to walk, and take those strategies that they learned and their mindset and their perspective. Because when you put yourself in your child's shoes, look at the whole, anything you're teaching them, if you can look at it from their perspective, then that's when you're going to be able to make it easy, happy, safe, and fun. And then get them doing it. And that's how you're going to be able to get them walking and talking. So I hope this was helpful for you. Once again, if you just joined on, go ahead and hit the like button, share it with your friends, and anybody else who might have questions about, why is my child late walking and late talking? What else do we have to overcome? All of those kinds of things. You can share this video with them and give them some ideas on how to help your late talking child learn to use the words they need to share their wisdom with the world. I'll see you next time for my next live. Oh, by the way, if you haven't already, you really should join my language facilitation resources group. I'll put the link in the description here of the video, so you definitely can check out the group. And if you happen to have a child who is stuck in that nonverbal communication, if they're using motor skills to communicate with you, and you don't know how to get them over the hump, to give up those motor skills and start to use verbal language, that's what I do. I help parents do that in my Waves of Communication Parent Coaching Program. And if you are interested in learning more about that, you can send me a private message and I can hook you up with my free class and website and all of that, so you can learn more about Waves of Communication, how we help all the parents in the program, helping their kids learn to use words within 3 to 6 weeks. Nonverbal kids, giving up all this nonverbal stuff. So I am really happy that you joined me again today, and I will catch you on my next live. Have a great day today. If it isn't fun, it isn't fun. So get out there and have fun with your kiddos. Bye-bye.